Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Mind's Eye Podcast. I'm Paul James Caden, and in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the afterlife. This is a popular topic amongst many people, myself included. A lot of people want to know what happens when we die. Do we move onward to some higher and better world? Do some souls go to a place of burning fire? Or is there just oblivion? What about near-death experiences and deathbed visions? Are these merely tricks of a dying brain deprived of oxygen? Do near-death experiences contradict one another? Many people say yes, that it depends on one's culture, on what they see at that moment of death. I think first it would be wise to look at all of the things that the near-death experience has in common. And this goes back to ancient cultures, ancient Egypt, ancient China, throughout time, as long as man has been keeping records, these deathbed visions and near-death experience visions have been recorded. And the things they have in common are generally the deceased relative or loved one that shows up, someone who's already passed on. This deceased loved one coming to gather the person who is about to make their journey into the afterlife. And the next thing we see in common is the journey. And the journey can be a little bit different for most people throughout time and history. It has been something akin to the tunnel of light that we so often read about in near-death experiences. This tunnel of light is sometimes said to open above the dying person, in front of the dying person, in the ceiling, or in one of the corners of the room that they are in. Now, sometimes this tunnel of light is just that. It's the tunnel they travel through. They get to the other side, and they're in a very paradise-like setting. There's people that they know gathered around waiting to meet them and greet them. There may be people they don't know, or what they describe as angels or heavenly beings. But sometimes this journey is a little bit different. Sometimes the journey to the afterlife takes on the appearance of, one person said that they seemed like they were on a boat crossing a great body of water. And as they approached the shore on the other side of this great body of water, there was the light beckoning them to enter. Another person that I don't know personally, but a relative of mine is acquainted with, has more pagan beliefs. And she had a near-death experience, and during her experience, she said that she found herself floating very gently through a wooded area. And in the distance, there was a group of trees and I think some vines hanging down. And on the other side of those trees and those vines was a very bright light. And from that light, a voice emanated and told her that she needed to go back. It wasn't her time. So the deceased relative, the journey, the light that we all enter into seem to be major components that all near-death experiences or deathbed visions have in common. And sometimes these experiences may contain heavenly beings, angels. Some people describe going through the tunnel of light or on the journey toward the light with this being of light, or what just feels like a loving presence next to them. And you'll hear people say, I didn't see anyone, but I felt them there. And I felt like it was a man, or I felt like it was a woman. And sometimes this presence that is with them will speak to them, and other times it doesn't say anything. It just has a very loving, comforting presence. And sometimes that being is seen to be, a beautiful angel, some spiritual heavenly being that is accompanying the soul into the afterlife. So these are the things that all of these experiences throughout time seem to have in common. The thing that is different where people say, well, I don't understand, uh, there are differences, and mostly from what I've read and from what I've seen, those differences have to do with the religious figure that meets them on the other side. Many people, including atheists, Christians, Jews, Muslims, say that they met Jesus on the other side. There's a lot of people who are non-Christians who said that Jesus was there and he walked and he talked with them before they were told that it wasn't their time and that they had to come back. Some people have seen Hindu gods, and some of them were Hindu, and I'm aware of a person that I'm acquainted with that had a near-death experience when he was in his late teens, and he was born and raised as a Christian. But he said when he had the out-of-body experience and found himself entering into the light and coming out into this, beautiful land, that the beings that surrounded him, though he was a Christian, they looked like the Hindu gods. They had the blue skin. Some of them had more than two arms. But he said he wasn't alarmed. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't thinking, what is this? What are these creatures? He said it felt very natural and very loving and very familiar. And when he returned from that near-death experience, he said he was more open to other religions. He later in life, because of that experience, ended up leaving his more fundamentalist religion and having more of an open mind, though he did have more leanings toward like Buddhism and certain parts of Hinduism. There are some people that, Muslims mostly, but sometimes people who were not Muslims or are not Muslims at all, encountered the Prophet Muhammad. And the people that encounter Muhammad seem to be, he seems to make less of an appearance in the near death or deathbed vision, but he's certainly someone who does um, occasionally appear to people who are of the Muslim faith and those who are not. They might be Christians or atheists or seeking their spiritual path in life. So, why this mix up of different religious figures and gods? That would be a big question to answer. And I don't think anybody really will know the answer until we get there. But I would venture to say that there is some truth in all of our religions, whether we agree with them entirely or not. There's truth in Catholicism, there's truth in fundamentalism, fundamentalist Christianity that I came out of, and I thought it was a pretty negative religion after a while, but there's some truth there. There is truth in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Islam, in any religion that you want to pick out of a hat. So, my personal opinion about all of that is kind of like the story that the gods gave the heavenly messengers. There's this old tale or this old story where the gods gave this heavenly messenger a glass orb containing all of the truth about God and the universe and the afterlife, and they sent the messenger to Earth to deliver this sphere to mortal man. But when the messenger approached the Earth, he tripped and he fell, and the glass orb shattered. And little by little throughout the ages, men have found little pieces of what once was that glass sphere and say, I have the truth. And another one finds another piece and says, no, I have the truth. And on it goes, not knowing, men not knowing, mortal man, that all of those fragments that they have found are all part of a bigger whole. I don't think the afterlife puts on any airs for us to try to delude us into believing one thing or another or prove that we are right over other people. I feel that it comes to us as it is and what is perhaps appropriate for us to encounter when people have those brief encounters in something like a near-death experience. And so maybe there's something there we need to pay attention to and maybe ourselves be more open-minded toward other faiths, other people's belief systems, because maybe they have a piece of that glass orb that is part of the whole that we don't have. There's a really kind of cool documentary series on Netflix right now called Surviving Death. And that is an interesting one to watch. I'm not all the way through it yet, but they talk about near-death experience. They talk about mediums, and there are some mediums on there who are obvious frauds. And I think they kind of get exposed, but they try to make excuses, that, oh, this is my burden, that people will think I'm getting, information off the internet. But it's really interesting in parts. And there is one doctor or scientist there who said, he never believed in near-death experiences, but he raised a question that a lot of doctors and scientists have when it comes to studying near-death experience. And that is, if a near-death experience is nothing more than the dying brain deprived of oxygen, then why is that brain still having this hallucination when there's no brain activity, no heartbeat, everything flatlines? The person is clinically dead. And so this one doctor in the documentary, and I've heard other people say it as well, if consciousness is only in the brain and there's no brain activity, then how is the brain still thinking and dreaming and hallucinating so coherently at those moments? It shouldn't be that way. It's a scientific contradiction that even if the brain deprived of oxygen, it dies. There's no brain activity. It's just a flat line. At best, it would be just a jumble of images and thoughts and confusion, things kind of rushing by as the brain is shutting down. It wouldn't be a coherent experience where the person wakes up with these deep philosophies and experiences and a tale that goes from A to Z very coherently and perfectly. So that's one of the things about the near-death experience that is very interesting, and there are many more that I think raise a lot of questions and prove that the dying brain scenario, um, the folks who hung that explanation on the NDE weren't really thinking it through, or they didn't care to look at the research that's done on the near-death experience to actually know the entirety of what they're talking about before coming up with an assumption of what it is. And I think sometimes science can be like religion in that regard, that it just comes up with, yeah, well, here's what we think it is. And it's very strange that they're almost dogmatic. They come up with this notion of what it is and then absolutely refuse to look at anything that people hand them and say, well, no, it can't be because look at all of this evidence. And they'll say, nope, 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 nope. We've made up our mind. Nothing here to see. So I find that very strange and also kind of ignorant coming from educated men who are supposed to be scientists and doctors that are looking for the truth. I don't think when it comes to the survival of consciousness after death, um, we should be allowing our own biases to get in the way. And, as far as bias goes, I think there's religious bias as well. Because a lot of the deathbed visions and near death experiences, all very similar. Always the light, always, sometimes that light will open up to, what looks like a window or a portal looking through, to another world. And the person having the deathbed vision will say, oh, it's so beautiful over there. And oh my God, here comes, my mother, here comes, whoever. And they're so elated and happy. And then they just take their last breath and, they're gone. So, a lot of similarities between deathbed visions and near death experiences. And, these visions and these experiences aren't always in line with our religions. And, that's just one I think also we have to accept. Maybe we don't have it all figured out. Many Christians here in this day and age think the afterlife is, you know, uh, very clear cut. You die, you will see Jesus, you will be judged, and you will be allowed to go to heaven or sent to hell. And the hell experience in near death experiences is actually, there's very few people, it's like 1% or less than 1% that actually have what is called a hell experience. So the other 99% or 99.5% or whatever it might be, whether they're atheist, whether they're Christian, whether they're Hindu, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Buddhist, whatever they might be, they're still having that very positive, loving, peaceful experience. So I think to write it out and say, well, here's what the afterlife is, and then like the scientists who are very biased and say, well, all those near death experiences, they're just, and those deathbed visions, well, they're just deceptions of the devil to try to confuse us about what happens after death. I think that's also a very ignorant position to take. I more respect even the Islamic view of paradise because they don't really go into a great amount of detail of what that is because they admit they don't know, nor does the Quran elaborate on it, only that it's very beautiful, very peaceful. We will have pure companions, people around us, friends, family, um, that are very loving. There's no betrayal, all is good, and it's a very beautiful paradise. And every man has his own garden, whatever the garden might be. But beyond that, they'll tell you we don't really know. It hasn't been revealed in our religion exactly what heaven or paradise is like, or the hereafter, the afterlife. We know it's very beautiful. We know it's very positive. We know it's going to be wonderful, but we couldn't tell you exactly uh, what is there. And I think that's a more honest approach to take rather than to come up with these conclusions based on what we think it is. Well, this person died and didn't see Jesus, so they were deceived by the devil. This person was a Christian and saw, beings that look like Hindu gods. So that just shows it's a confused hallucination. Maybe there's more to it than meets the eye. I suppose we would have to think that if consciousness does survive physical death, and this is not the time nor the place to really get into all of that, but there's a lot of research that's been done, not to mention the experiences people have had. Reliable witnesses, people that woke up in the middle of the night or walked into the kitchen and there's mom or grandma and they've been dead for 6 months, a year, 2 years. I've had experiences like that where I know what I saw, I know what I heard. There were experiences I've had in my life I could look at and say, yeah, I really don't know, so I couldn't swear to it. But then there are experiences that I've had personally, and I know other people had experiences that I know and trust, and they would say, as I would, you could shoot me up with sodium pentothal, the truth-telling serum, I believe that is, and question me, and I'll tell you the same story because I'm absolutely sure and know what was in front of me, what I saw, what I heard, what happened. So there's a lot that really points to this world beyond matter. And what is that world beyond matter? We have this notion that it's going to be just like life here on earth. We go to heaven and we have a mansion and we have a beautiful garden and all of our relatives are there and there's mountains and trees and flowers and we all live happily ever after and go every so often to bask and worship, in the presence of God. And that's our afterlife for all eternity. But who's to say that the hereafter is just that one dimensional place called heaven that we go to and stay there forever in our little mansion, our little house? It's happy, it's great, and that's fine if that's what it was. But we're talking about God. God is spirit, infinite intelligence, infinite mind, infinite power. A being that is so far beyond what we've imagined. I always say the man sitting on the throne with the crown on his head. Uh, God would be consciousness himself, surrounding and permeating everything. As the Bible says, in God we live and move and have our being. So I would imagine that an infinite intelligence would have infinite realms and possibilities. And if we ourselves are spirit in the afterlife, pure energy, pure thought, pure consciousness, what are the possibilities of cosmic exploration, interdimensional exploration? I mean, who knows what we would be capable of and capable of seeing and doing. So I would always imagine and has always imagined that the afterlife is something much bigger and much more fantastic than we dream up in our little minds here upon planet Earth, because to us everything there is just like it is here. I'm a person, so God is a person. I live in a house, so there I'll live in a house. I like to climb mountains, so there'll be mountains. There's trees and grass here, there'll be trees and grass there. And that's where I'll be forever and ever. And I'll probably be a vegetarian because nobody kills and eats animals or flesh in heaven, and that's fine. But I think we have too much of this um, trying to make it seem familiar that we can wrap our minds around. But I think the near death experience and the deathbed visions and some of the diversity that's in those things show us that the afterlife, person's experience isn't more right than the next person's experience. Maybe they're just seeing two different people having two experiences that are similar but different. Maybe they're just seeing certain aspects of the afterlife for a reason. Two parts of a whole. And maybe we can't put a label on exactly what it is or how it is. Maybe we, like the Muslims, should say, hey, it's going to be great, it's going to be beautiful, it's going to be exciting, it's going to be glorious, but we really don't know exactly what it entails. Because we don't. We've never been there. And nobody that's had a near death experience has been dead long enough to explore the entirety of the afterlife and come back and say, oh, geez, here's what it is. A lot of people that have had near death experiences say that that beautiful place they find themselves in when they come out of the tunnel of light or enter into the light, that they've come to understand that that is just like a waiting room or the lobby to the greater heavens. There's something beyond that that they didn't see. So if that's the case, who's to say what's beyond that beautiful little, paradise-like setting that people find themselves in beyond the light? What's beyond that? Perhaps something that we couldn't even wrap our thinking around. So for me personally, I do believe there is an afterlife. I think there's too much interesting research, too many experiences that people have had over the years, over the centuries, over the decades. Um, Too many experiences that I've had, things that I've seen, research that I've done. I'm, 99% sure that there's an afterlife. I mean, everybody has a little doubt, like, yeah, what if there isn't? Well, I guess that's okay too. You know, we're not going to know it if there isn't, but I'm mostly sure that there is, and I'm also fairly confident that um, what is there is something that we're not able to slap a label on here and make it so cut and dry. Human beings, we We like things cut and dry. We like things explained. We like to know where we're going or what's next. We like to know what's for dinner, what's for lunch, what's on TV, what are we going to watch tonight? So we don't like it if there's something ahead of us that we don't have that control over. We can't press a button or mark the calendar or set the schedule or be the interior decorator and say, well, hey, here's what I'd like the afterlife to be, and here's what I'm going to do. It's beyond our control. It's beyond our knowing. It's bigger than us. But I personally feel that when we get there, we're also, it's kind of like going back to school as we learn this whole new reality we were never even aware of. And I think there is a God. Many people in near-death experiences, uh, the closest they have come to seeing God was to say that there was a great bright light that, just as I said before, permeated everything, and the light spoke to them. This light that fills everything, fills the universe and beyond, everything in it, everything beyond it. That is God. And I think he has a lot of very interesting things in store for us when we reach that distant shore of the hereafter. I'm Paul James Caden. This is the Mind's Eye podcast. I thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I'll see you next time here on the Mind's Eye. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and be good to one another. Peace.